pass in, and I know Marina has a lot of good things to go over today. So I am going to launch us here and just tell you a little bit about the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network, if you're not already familiar with us. So for about 2 years now, we're going to go on our 2-year anniversary. We have been running the first ever National Technical Assistance Center on Grandfamilies and Kinship families here at Generations United. And we're not designed to help the families directly. That's why it says on the families. We're working with systems like yours and organizations and nonprofits around the country to help them improve their services and supports for the families, because you know your community's best, you know your family's best, you know your state laws and policies best. So what our role is, what we can do is really elevate those promising things that we see around the country that you can replicate. And that is the very nature of today's webinar, is you're going to hear about things that you can lift and do tomorrow if you want, even, although Marina may take issue with that. At the Technical Assistance Center, we respond to individual requests for help. So you'll see that link to a box, to a form where you can ask for assistance with any number of things. And Marina is one of our subject matter experts, so we can loop her in if we need to as well through that process to help. We also have this series of webinars, and we have lots and lots of resources on our website, which is right there linked, and which is right here. There's a picture of the homepage and the link to the website. We encourage you to sign up for a monthly newsletter where we summarize kind of all the resources that we've posted within the last month. And we are constantly posting resources. We probably post around 5 or 6 a month. So you will get new resources and new tools that hopefully can help you in your work, better supporting the family. So please sign up for the newsletter. And it is my thrill and delight to roll out the new Kin-Finding Toolkit, which literally just got up on our website an hour ago, if even, maybe 45 minutes. And you can download this resource, and you see here where it is. And Kylie is going to drop the link in the chat as well, so that you have it handy, but you also get these slides, as I mentioned. It's my privilege to introduce you all to Marina Nitze, who is a subject matter expert for the Technical Assistance Center here, and we've worked together. She's a fellow at the New America's New Practice Lab. She works on improving America's foster care system, doing just a lot of things. And she was previously part of the Obama administration, working on all kinds of technical things, and at the VA, the CTO there. So she brings a ton of experience, not just with child welfare, but with technology. So I think we're going to really benefit from hearing about what she shares with us today. So Marina, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I am extremely excited about this. We've been working on Kin-Finding for years together, and it's exciting to put together all of this in one toolkit. As we mentioned, there are 22 practices we're going to talk about today. We welcome you dropping questions in the chat as I go along, and Anna, you'll call them out for me if I miss one, rather than waiting until the end, but we will leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions if we didn't get to them. So I want to talk a little bit about the origin of the questions, of the practices, and then we'll dive into the practices themselves. So one note on Kin-Finding. So I run something called the Resource Family Working Group. Maybe that's helpful. It's a coalition of 35 child welfare agencies, mostly states, but some counties and county administered systems. And we get together and share surface and scale promising practices around Kin-Finding quite a bit. We used to call it family finding, and then found that that term was also being used in the general recruitment space for finding, families for kiddos who need them. And so we have shifted and call it Kin-Finding, which is more clearly mean finding a child's kin, not finding general foster homes for children, although that is also a super worthwhile endeavor. And so across the child welfare systems in the working group, they surfaced these. So we did not kind of make any of these up in a secret room. These are all practices that agencies are using now that they credit with helping substantially improve their kin-finding practices. And so that's where they come from. So this is maybe Marina speaking only, but I think as a country, we could get to 80% kin placement. And I believe that because there are some benchmarks right now. Rhode Island's at 69%. Illinois just reported in a Federal Register comment that they're at 76%. I've seen huge jumps in particular agencies when they start adopting the practices in the toolkit that we're going to talk about today. So maybe 80% is ambitious, but I don't think so based on those two benchmarks, right? And so I know as a country right now in AFGARs, we're at about 34% kin placement. Some other research that we did in April of this year, which checked in with states, put us at more like 44% as a nation. So 10% jump, that's pretty great. And again, I think that there's a lot of room to keep improving. And so that's why I'm particularly excited about this toolkit. If you are so inclined, we have made a dashboard to track adoption against this toolkit. California, Michigan, I'm not picking on you. I just grabbed you in this screenshot. And the goal is to kind of fill in who's doing what and drive what we intend to be a really positive sense of peer pressure and support for every state adopting more kin-finding practices. And so with that, we're going to dive in. Every practice in the toolkit, which you guys will all see now, is really meant to make it as easy as possible for you to act on these practices. Almost all of the practices are free to implement, which I put in quotes because I understand nothing is free in our government agencies, right? Things take time. We have to update training. We have to update policies and practice manuals. Nothing is literally free, but these are not meant to be things that require you to issue contracts or procurements or, procure expensive outside services. And so for each one, we also include actionable materials from other agencies that have already adopted it. Maybe it's a form, maybe it's a template, maybe it's a guide, maybe it's policy, whatever it may be for that particular practice. It includes links that we hope you can take and adapt for your particular agency. And we also welcome, if you have more examples, as you see in the toolkit, we would love to know that. And we can then add them back into the toolkit and create an even richer body of resources for everybody that wants to implement them. So we're going to jump into the 22 practices. And again, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. I'll try to pause and answer them. And if I miss it, we can address them in the last few minutes. So the first promising practice is asking youth about their kin. This works really well because nobody knows a youth's kin better than themselves. And this may sound simple, but a lot of agencies do not do this today. Or they think they are doing this, but when we review kind of the actual process, everybody thinks somebody else is doing it. And so we highlight this. Frankly, this was number one because it's the most important in my perspective. And it's one that's almost too easy to skip over by mistake. And so things that the toolkit includes are questions. What are the best practice questions for talking to youth about their kin, youth of all ages? So as folks in the audience may know, it's not a best practice to ask a child who they can live with tonight. That's really scary, and it puts a lot of pressure on their shoulders. Better questions are, who came to your birthday party? Who did you spend the holidays with? Who picks you up at school if you're sick? And then from there, you can start mapping out a child's kin relationships. And this may involve multiple conversations. A child may be, frankly, too traumatized to have this conversation right at time of removal, but may open up and be more willing to share and answer these questions over time. So the toolkit includes example questions for asking, and then also example ways to capture what a youth's responses are from different states. All right. Practice number 2 is an expansive legal definition of kin. And we have a very specific one that's recommended in the toolkit. And this came out of, for folks that have been following the process around the federal draft rule that may allow states to have kin-specific licensing processes. This recommended definition of kin was universally recommended by all the different child welfare organizations. And it is individuals related to a child by blood, marriage, tribal custom, and or adoption, and other individuals who have an emotionally significant relationship with the child or the child's parents or other family members, often referred to as fictive kin. This definition in particular, as we talked through kind of edge cases where you think about there's a sibling group, one child they have an available kinship caregiver who's their best friend's parents. And those best friends' parents are also willing to take that child's other siblings to keep the sibling group together. But maybe some of those other siblings haven't met these people before, right? We want to include that in a really expansive, inclusive way, because kin come in all shapes, sizes, types. When we try to define it by degrees of sanguinity, I don't know if I can pronounce that, or degrees of legal relation, that's too restrictive. That's leaving, that's keeping out real relationships that kids have. And so we hope this recommended definition is helpful. And especially, just to touch on this for a second, states can have, or agencies can have, different definitions for different purposes. You can have an expansive definition of kin for purposes of emergency placement. We definitely encourage that. But when it comes to permanency, perhaps your agency wants to prioritize one particular category of kin over another when comparing multiple placement options. That's still on the table, but when you have a really expansive definition up front, it means that that kiddo that doesn't have that prioritized category of kin available, but has other kin available, that they can still be safely and quickly placed with them and avoid the trauma of being placed with strangers, having to wait for that kin to go through a licensing process, which we all know can take hundreds of days in many states before they can get placed with them. Okay, third promising practice is requiring senior staff sign-off for non-kin placements. Some agencies refer to this as a firewall policy. And here the idea is it shifts the incentives and behavior of placement, that when I'm going to make a non-kin placement as a responsible official for, as an official responsible for placement, I'm going to go make a non-kin placement, and someone is going to check in with me on that. My supervisor is going to say, hey, Marina, can you walk me through what steps you took to find for kin? And they're going to help brainstorm what additional steps might be available to find kin before we move to a non-kin stranger placement. And in the agencies that have implemented this, they have reported tremendous shifts in initial kin placement rates as a result of this practice in particular. Placement desk officials are under incredible stress. This is not trying to get them in trouble or diminish them in any way, right? You have a kiddo who needs a home. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. That is unbelievably stressful. And there is a tendency to call, the person that I often call Mary. Mary is the general foster placement that will say yes to every placement, right? But then in 10 days, all those placements will disrupt. And so Mary absolutely keeps those kiddos safe for a few days. But perhaps if we had taken some additional steps to find kin early on and not called Mary, it would have taken a little bit of extra time, but that would ultimately be better in the sense of the kiddos. Natalie asks, agencies that have implemented this, yes. New Mexico and New York both have policies that are linked in the toolkit that you can look at to see if it might be a policy that you can copy for your own agency. Those are not necessarily the only two, but those are the two linked in the toolkit. Promising practice 4 is maintaining a shared list of kin. Again, this may sound overly simplistic, and I would really welcome an example of this. I have not found an agency that is doing this in the sense of a shared list across all of a child's team members, parents, foster parents, current kin caregiver, CASA, social worker, placement desk, et cetera. Is there a place where everybody is looking at one list of all of a child's kin? And this can help solve at least 2 problems. One is when everybody thinks someone else has contacted grandma, but actually nobody has, because nobody can see who has done that, right? So everybody's assuming someone else contacted grandma and actually nobody has. Or the flip of that is when 6 people contact grandma at the same time and frankly overwhelm her and scare her, and now she's not engaged. And so this recommendation is simply what it states as, is having a list with every kin that's been identified, and ideally who has reached out to them last, and maybe a 1 or 2 sentence summary of what that contact was. And again, this needs to be shared across all the team members. Now, you might be thinking, my IT system doesn't allow us to do that. That's a pretty common barrier, but we found some creative workarounds that we mentioned in the toolkit. For example, maybe at monthly meetings that you might call a shared planning meeting or a team decision-making meeting, or whatever you may call that meeting, this list can be updated and perhaps even distributed over email or over an Excel spreadsheet, so that everybody can keep up to date on who's last talked to which kin. We all know that situations can change. Maybe one caregiver currently has placement, but now we need to look for a new placement. And also kids just need kin in many, many ways. It's not just about placement. And so making sure there's that shared list means that as the case continues, folks can find additional opportunities to loop in that whole support network to support that child. There's a question about if there's a firewall policy in Texas, and my answer is I do not know. But if somebody else knows, that would be great to share.
And Marina, Natalie also asked if you could discuss the process for the firewall maybe a little more.
Sure, let's do that. So the process, at least in the two that are in the toolkit, requires the person making the placement decision to contact their supervisor and get sign-off for a non-kin placement. This can be, depending on how your system sign-offs work, a note in a case file in the IT system, or a verbal. It doesn't need to be, a signed, notarized signature. And in New Mexico in particular, I think they did a nice job of thinking through who's on call to make those decisions, because as we all know, a placement desk is not a 9 to 5. And so your literal supervisor may not be available 24/7, probably shouldn't be for work-life balance purposes. And so making sure that someone is on call to make that sign off if and when it's needed. So that's the kind of premise behind the sign-off process. Okay, so we talked about maintaining a shared list, so we can bob to 5, which is a dedicated family finding responsibility. So some agencies have kin finding teams. Some agencies have dedicated kin finding individuals in the agency, and some agencies have it the responsibility of a child's caseworker who's taking an ongoing case. Some have it the responsibility of the licensing worker who's working with the current family. This recommendation is not that one of those options is better than another. It's that someone needs to, at the end of the day, have responsibility for kin finding. And what happens in a lot of agencies is it's everybody's job. And when it's everybody's job, it is nobody's job. And so this recommendation is really to make it very clear who has that responsibility. And then it lists a number of ways in the toolkit for how to formalize that. It might be some part of someone's position description. It might be part of their performance review responsibilities. And when you're doing that, this is not meant to be a stick in the sense of a carrot and a stick. Whoever's responsibility it is needs to have the resources to kin find appropriately. And one of those key things is they need to be able to have a relationship with the child and the child's parents. And so one thing that this practice does not recommend is having an isolated kin finding practice, because that to me reinforces the idea that finding kin is something that, technology can do. What if we had AI that just found a child's kin? That's not how relationships work. Relationships are human to human connections, and whoever is doing the kin finding needs to be able to talk to the child's other workers, talk to the child's family, and as we'll talk about later, talk to them more than once. For various reasons, that first conversation may not reveal all kin available. People are traumatized, they're untrusting, they're angry, they're scared. So there might be, it's really helpful and important to have ongoing conversations as a kin finding responsibility. So again, depending on your agency, your size, your structure, et cetera, it might make sense to have a dedicated team. It might make sense to have a dedicated individual, but whatever it may be, they need to have really clear responsibility within your agency for that kin finding. They need to have that in their performance review, their position description, and they need to have the tools to do it. Using social media. This is one of my favorite practices because it really unlocks a lot of access to kin in the states that I've helped do this. And as Anna mentioned, I used to be the Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I am very familiar with government IT approvals. and how much paperwork and how many months or years it can feel like to get through to get, Facebook unblocked. I've actually helped some states to do that. And I will toss out, if you are in a state where social media is blocked, feel free to reach out to me. And I would love to come meet with your CIO or help make a case, because that's a really, really hard thing to unlock from the field. But here's social media for finding kin can really unlock relationships, and not only that, ways to access kin. So the story I like to tell here a lot when I'm talking about this practice is my own godson. He is 11, and I have asked him the best practice questions for asking youth about their kin. Who comes to your birthday party? Who did you see at the holidays? Who picks you up at school when you're sick? And every time he says, Aunt Marina and Uncle Charles, Aunt Marina and Uncle Charles, Aunt Marina and Uncle Charles. Great. What's our last name? He has no idea at 11, and he certainly can't spell it. And so if he was in a removal situation and needed to reach me, he would be able to articulate that I am kin, but not have any way to find me. But if you pull up his parents on Facebook, I'm in hundreds of photos, at which point he can point and say, that's Aunt Marina, that's Uncle Charles. And then you have my full name with the spelling and a way to message me. And so in the places I've helped implement social media for kin finding, and also frankly in many where I haven't helped, but they've come in and shared their stories, this is really powerful tool. But to do it, you need the right practice guide in place. Not everyone is comfortable using social media. And what we have in the toolkit are sample policies from different child welfare agencies that have developed what we think are really strong guidelines. For example, you don't want individual employees using their personal Facebook accounts or their personal Twitter or X, I guess now, accounts to reach out to family members, because then it's going to start suggesting them as friends and have this whole kind of downstream challenge that we don't want. So agencies have created dedicated kin finding accounts on these social media platforms that can be used. You want to make sure that these accounts are being used in such a way that if you have multiple kin finders, they can all access one another's messages, right? Because you don't want 3 different people contacting the same kin, or worse, someone contacting kin, getting a response, but then they're on vacation that day. And now a week goes by and nobody wrote back to the kin. And then there's different best practices about how to send messages on social media, right? Because we can't violate a child or a family's privacy by sharing a whole bunch of information in a Facebook message. But the flip of that is you don't want to seem like a scammer, which are more and more prevalent on social media. You don't want somebody to think that, you are a sneaky bot trying to get money from them. And so there's some recommended language around messages that you may want to send. And frankly, some employees are going to be more comfortable with this than others. And so part of adopting this can definitely be a practice guide with best practices and recommendations. And part of it may be thinking about what your kin finding team, what their skill set is, what their comforts are. And, maybe within the team, some people can take on social media and some people don't. I will caution here, though, that finding kin on social media does not necessarily mean you should be using social media to dig into everybody's history or go back and, try to do suitability searches with social media, which are very, I think, rightly controversial in terms of licensing or approving kin. So thank you for this is great social media kin finding. Yes. And I would love, again, to hear more stories, have more examples. I think this is an area that can really, really help. If your agency is not using social media, would really strongly encourage this practice. I mean, all the practices, but like this practice in particular.
Marina, do you come across issues where leadership is just concerned to let workers have access to social media because they're afraid they're going to waste their own worker time on social media for personal reasons?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had conversations with a few, but this is a story of hope. I think that's absolutely the initial concern of IT leaders, especially when you don't have maybe an IT leader for child welfare, but maybe you're within a larger agency like your whole health and human services. And there's, I think, a pretty prevalent belief, if we have social media in office, people are going to watch cat videos and waste time, and they're not going to be as productive. But But I think I've seen this resolved in multiple states with state IT leaders when they understand the real use cases. So not only is social media really powerful for finding kin, I've also heard stories of how it's really powerful for finding teens that seem to have run away. I remember one story of a worker telling me that there was a kiddo who I think was about 16 who was in care, and everybody had reported that he had run away. But on Facebook, he was very clearly in the hospital having his baby with his girlfriend. And she, because it was blocked in the office, had to leave the office building, use her personal device, and find him on Facebook. And so I think that was another compelling story of the different ways that social media can be used positively. And again, feel free to reach out to me. As a former federal CTO, sometimes a state CIO is willing to have a meeting with me and I can kind of speak their lingo. Most states, I think, have it unblocked at this point, but I'd be very personally happy to help if there's more barriers there.
Thank you.
Victoria's wondering, is it harder when dealing with sibling groups that have different mothers or fathers? Yes, that is harder, but I think it's also a dynamic that may affect many of our families. And so are you asking maybe, is there like a particular best practice around how to handle that? In which case my answer is, I don't know, but I would love to hear answers from others. Because I'm imagining the tension is you want to keep sibling groups together, but if they have different parents, then their primary placement is, of course, probably going to be their individual parents. And we've heard a lot of stories of how in situations with sibling groups, maybe if there is one parent that's having a challenge, another parent of one or more of the siblings will take the whole sibling group. We've heard a lot of stories of that. Okay, practice 7 is using a variety of contact methods. Some agencies we have worked with almost exclusively send physical letters in the mail for absent notices, and or just general for kin finding. I'm going to say that physical letters in the mail are the least effective by a large margin for kin finding. And if nothing else, though, we want to make sure that you've unlocked a variety of contact methods. There's social media, like we talked about. There's phone calls. You might need to text people because they're not going to answer unknown phone calls, but they will see a text message. Sometimes you may need to walk around the neighborhood or walk around where a child was removed from and talk to folks. So we want to encourage that, but we also understand in a government context, your team may feel like they're not allowed to do some of these things because there's FOIA, right? There's like discovery records, or you're gonna have to submit them to the court, et cetera. And so the toolkit includes a number of really specific tips in this area of you should have a variety of contact methods that are approved, but you're gonna have to think through for each one how your agency is gonna support its other needs for privacy, for discovery in court cases, for records retention, whatever it may be. And luckily, like other people have solved those problems. So you can look and say, all right, I want to send email kin finding notices. How have other agencies handled this for records retention? I want to use Facebook to contact kin. How do I handle records retention and discovery for that? And so these have been solved, not to say that you might have still better ideas and examples to share, which we'd love. But making sure if you're kin finding currently leans in one particular method, and particularly if that method is physical letters in the mail, our user research has shown that families that receive those physical letters in the mail usually throw them out, and or they are afraid they are scary legal notices about something else and they never open them. And that's a whole lot of kin that are potentially lost that we could get to if we instead knocked or emailed or texted or called or contacted them on Facebook. So Trina says, we have a high population of grandfamilies in Maryland, but they don't typically use social media. Methods to locate grandparents or other relatives that do not utilize social media would be helpful. Yeah, we're going to keep talking about different ways. I'm not saying by all means everybody's discoverable on social media, but just that some kin are. And so you want to keep that in your toolkit. All right, we talked about using a variety of contact methods. The next one is involving kin prior to removal. So I think we're all familiar with the fact that every removal is not a 2 a.m. emergency that we didn't see coming. There may be engagements, there may be intakes, there may be meetings ahead of time. And a number of agencies that we talked with reported that they felt that they weren't allowed to include kin prior to dependency being established for different privacy or legal reasons. And that is not the case, asterisk. Maybe someone will tell me that their state law actually does forbid that, in which case, please let me know. But in the states that we found, it turns out that actually there are ways to involve kin prior to removal. So we have a number of examples in the toolkits of times that and types of meetings that you may want to invite more kin. And it may not be that you, the agency, are inviting kin so much as that you, the agency, create an environment and a space for the parents and the children to invite and include kin. And if you do have privacy concerns, we have a couple of examples from states that have like a privacy sign-off for the parents that allow the agency pre-removal, pre-dependency to contact kin and talk to them. And so that might be something to consider as well. But something as seemingly small, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, as having spaces on the meeting invites for kin to be listed can dramatically shift the kin that come to meetings. Not only does this mean if you have kin involved before a dependency or before a removal, that now you know who they are, right? And you don't have to, suddenly find them at 2 o'clock in the morning. You already have grandma's name and phone number, and she's already kind of aware of what's going on. But I'm going to say that, like, in some cases, engaging that kin early may mean that there's no removal at all, because you've helped engage a support network to get that family the support and resources that they need to potentially avoid a removal. And that's even better than needing to find a kin placement. And so engaging prior to removal may also mean that if it seems likely that this may move to a dependency, or maybe you're at an in-home dependency, you might be able to conduct one or more approval steps on the kin ahead of time, like a background check, and make that available. Some states, some agencies have it for as long as 1 year, where you've already conducted your approval steps on grandma or an aunt or a neighbor, whoever it may be, so that if removal is necessary, that person is pre-approved and ready to go. Obviously, this needs to be balanced very carefully, because we don't want to assume, if we have not reached removal, that we're going to reach removal, right? The goal is definitely to avoid that. And it could be really threatening and really complicate relationships if you think this step means, let's pre-approve and pre-license all these kin that we're interacting with. But there may be times when it makes sense to at least share information about what the approval process is like, to casually mention things about how your agency can work around immigration documentation, or how your agency can work around certain criminal histories, so that they can hear that and are perhaps a little bit more comfortable engaging in the approval process if it comes to that. All right, next up is using a genogram. A genogram is effectively a family tree, but we don't use the term family tree in this toolkit because family tree can sometimes get people a little bit too focused on bloodlines and legal lines. And a genogram really needs to reflect all of a child's relationships, even if they are godparents or culturally family, but not legal or blood family, and their friends, and maybe teachers that are really close with them, and others. So genograms help draw out all of a child's connections. We include in the toolkit a number of tools from states that they recommended as some of their favorite or preferred genogram tools. And that ranges, some of them are paid tools. They're not too expensive, but they're not free, that can generate visuals. And then we have a couple examples, like Rhode Island made their own in Excel and shared that template for others to use as they want. And this is ideally going to be stored in a place that can be updated and that other people can access, so that people can add to a genogram over time, and then ideally annotate it, right? And say, maybe grandma has passed away, but you still leave her on there because she's going to uncover other branches of relationships that you want to capture. And genograms are not important just for placement, but for keeping a child connected to their kin. Think of Us, which is a nonprofit that focuses on helping older youth thrive in foster care, had a research project a couple of years ago where the kind of bottom line has really, really stuck with me, which is that of all the hundreds of youth that they talk to, all of them left foster care with fewer relationships that they entered with. And I think a genogram is one of many tools for helping ensure that we don't lose any of a child's connections while they're in care. And indeed, maybe we develop even more for them. So that's genograms. A variation on a genogram is a heart map. And I learned about this visiting Uplift Human Services in San Jose, California. This graphic down here is what a heart map looks like, but the toolkit includes a full page printout that you can do. And the concept of a heart map is that you sit down with a child and say, I want you to draw out for me who is in your heart. And you may see these 2 lines, and they very thoughtfully drew the 2 lines, because one line, and the idea is you write one kin on each line. When there was one line, some kiddos listed one person and then they didn't keep going. It didn't encourage them to keep going on. But then when they had 3 lines, some kiddos only had 2 connections, and the 3rd line made them feel pretty bad. So the idea is you start with the 2 lines, and then you can keep drawing more lines as you go. And one of the children who I watched fill this out live included her grandmother's dog on her heart map. And they made a plan, and I've checked in on this. It's still years later, she sees that dog every week. And that was based off of this heart map, where maybe a dog is not going to appear on a genogram, but that's still a really important connection to that child. And the more that we can keep those relationships nurtured and strong, the better. So this heart map, seemingly simple and straightforward, but I've seen it be pretty transformational in the agencies that have adopted it. So the toolkit includes a printable heart map that you can use in your agency. Oops, clicked too fast. All right, related to that is making a plan to keep a youth connected to all their supportive adults. And so the toolkit includes some examples of this. So often placement is such a sense of urgency that we focus all of our kin relationships on who can take placement. And then we lose track of the other kin and all of the rich relationships and connections that they can provide. And often, when we interview these kin connections, they share with us that they don't have an idea of what that child's needs are. And they assume often that somebody will let them know. And when there's not a plan to stay connected, nobody is in charge of kind of letting people, the kin know that, hey, this kiddo could use a ride. This kiddo could use help shopping for a prom dress. This kiddo could use math tutoring. Like, this kiddo needs a place to go for Thanksgiving. Whatever that need may be, when you have a plan to keep youth connected, and that also helps keep everybody on the same page about how to keep that plan going. Like I mentioned, the girl that was seeing her grandmother's dog, that needed transportation and scheduling, and everybody needed to be on the same page, that was an expected part of her plan, was visiting that dog. And similarly, whatever it may be that kiddos need, it needs to be a plan to keep them connected. And then accountability, that if someone hasn't seen their aunt or uncle or godparent, in a month, and the plan has been to see them every 2 weeks, that we go back to that plan and we solve for transportation or childcare or whatever we need to get that plan back on track. This toolkit item also includes a number of different meeting models. So we all know there's different recommended kind of meeting structures in child welfare. I don't have an opinion on which one is better or worse, but all of them involve keeping kin connected to them, whether that be inviting them or reviewing this plan at that meeting, et cetera. And so we have a number of very specific examples in the toolkit of whatever your agency's modality is for having regular planning meetings, how you're keeping kin connected to those meetings. So practice 12 is leveraging the court system to encourage kin. So a number of agencies have shared with us that they have updated court forms to include the question, what activities is the child currently placed with kin? What activities for kin finding has the agency engaged in? And we've seen a range of court forms, and the recommendation of this is really to have a narrative question, and by that I mean not a checkbox. Because I have been a CASA for almost 20 years now. I filled out a lot of court forms, and it's always late, you're always under pressure, et cetera. And when it's a checkbox, it's not always the same thing as when you have to spend a few minutes describing what kin-finding practices have been undergone. And so this is another way to have, the judges in the court system asking the question, what has been done to find kin for kiddos that are not placed with kin? Are we on top of the plan to keep youth connected with their supportive adults, even if they're not placed with some of them? And so this is just one more way to lift up and prioritize kin finding and make sure it doesn't fall through the cracks. This is, again, is not meant as a stick. This is meant as an additional check that, somebody went on vacation or oops, this step got missed. This is another way to make sure that thorough kin finding activities were conducted for every child in care. So the toolkit includes example court forms from agencies that are doing this now and some example procedures around adopting that. Practice 13 is using the snowball method. So this is about asking kin when you find them for more kin. We include some examples of all different ways where folks are doing this today. Some agencies have it on their notice form. So when you're emailing out or physically mailing out notices to the kin that you do know about, it asks if you know about additional kin and has them contribute back. If you have a shared list of kin, like we talked about earlier, that can be an amazing thing to share with the kin that you encounter, because then they can fill in blanks or they can explain relationships. We have gotten stories that actually some of the very best kin to talk to with the snowball method are currently incarcerated, because they often are the best source of complex family dynamics and tend to be very willing to share and collaborate on expanding the genogram or family tree or list. And so again, the premise of this practice is simply that when you're engaging with kin, part of that engagement is asking them about more kin and how to contact them. And this can be another way. I know the question earlier is about how do you find grandparents or other relatives that don't use social media. Maybe there's one second cousin that's on Facebook and you find them, and then through the snowball method, you're going to be able to unlock the aunts and uncles and other relatives that you weren't going to be able to reach that way. Number 14 is gentle commitment escalation. So this is something that we heard from a number of placement workers, which is sometimes you're calling kin or emailing kin who have no idea that that child exists, or at least know that that child exists, but had no idea that this child is now in foster care. It's traumatizing. It's scary. There's a lot of myths and fear around becoming a foster parent, right? Maybe the kin has varying immigration documentation. Maybe the kin has some kind of criminal history and they're afraid of being disqualified. And so opening with, hi, here's a child you maybe are just learning about in the last 10 seconds. Can you take them in an hour? Can cause people to shut down, hang up the phone, avoid it. It can generate a lot of different reactions. And so that's not a great way to open, recognizing the urgency of placement. And so the workers that we talked to that really highlighted this practice emphasized that and this was a universal thing, their first question that they recommend was, do you have a family photo? Not can you take placement, not can you make a lifelong commitment, but do you have a family photo that you can share? And so again, we welcome additional suggestions of kind of gentle escalation questions that you can ask when you're starting the process, because maybe that kin will engage and can engage, but if we scare them off in the beginning, we're going to lose them. So thinking about a gentle way to engage with them in the first interaction, and then you can go from there as you build a relationship and rapport with them. So practice 15 is never stop looking. So much kin finding is often focused in that first initial placement. And then whether or not a child is placed with kin often does not continue, or it doesn't continue in a structured way. And then, the placement disrupts, or in a worst case scenario, the kin caregiver passes away, or the non-kin caregiver disrupts, and now you're in an emergency again. And now we're in an emergency placement routine again, and that is a hard time to find kin. And so this recommendation is, and the toolkit includes multiple milestones based on agencies that do this now, where it's important to repeat your kin finding efforts and check back in with the kin that you've identified so far, and maybe see if there's new pathways for kin finding. Those checkpoints vary about every year. Some agencies do it every month. It really depends on kind of the structure of your kin finding responsibility already. But there's making sure that there's formal checkpoints for identifying and reviewing kin, or maybe it's simply when was the last time that the list of kin and who last reached out to who was updated, and making sure that somebody is putting eyes on it, every month or two while a case is still, open and early. And this could taper off over time as there's more of a permanency plan. And so the toolkit includes, again, example agency policies and checkpoints that you may want to consider looping into your agency. So promising practice 16 is about testing your communications with real kin. So we have talked to a number of kin caregivers or kin broadly who reported that when they first got the notice that a child in their family was removed and needed placement, they thought it was spam. They thought it was a legal notice, like a debt collection notice, and they ignored it. Or it was so full of government jargon and acronyms that they didn't understand what it meant. And so unclear communication is missing some potential kin placements. And this is something that we'd love to work together more in the future, potentially, on how we have some example templates that have really been tested with kin to make sure that it's not using jargon, that it's using plain language, that's not scary, but that it also is trustworthy, so that they, again, don't think that it's spam. We had a state tell us that of the whole state, not child welfare, not health and human services, the whole entire state, the number one source of complaints to their legislature was people who got the notice that a child that they knew was in foster care, and they thought it was like an identity theft scam. So they reported it to the state, to their state legislator. That's not the reaction that we want people to have to a kin-finding letter. And nobody did that on purpose, right? That was a total accidental outcome. But we can avoid that by having plain language letters that we've tried out with real kin and improved so that it's clear and not scary what the next steps are. So we really want to develop some of these templates in 2024, but I will say that I don't have a great example for you now, but I would love real examples. If somebody in this webinar thinks that you've written a clear, plain language letter, please let us know, and we would love to link to it in the toolkit. If we don't get one of those examples, we would love to spend some time developing some templates and sharing them back. And the testing communications, this maybe sounds like really hard or complicated, and there's professional user researchers and professional plain language writers, et cetera. But as the toolkit kind of walks through, and there's actually a case study of doing this in Michigan around other benefits, not foster care, but the concept still applies, is, give it a shot of writing it, sit down with real kin, and everybody's kin to somebody, right? So sit down with real people and have them read it without background, without context, and let you know what's confusing. What do they think they should do next if they received this letter? And then you can make tweaks and try it on more people. The only thing that I would caution there is you don't want to try it on your fellow child welfare workers, because we are all biased. We know too much about the system and how it works. So you want to test it on people that would not have any child welfare professional experience, so that they can give you feedback on, like, hey, I don't know what this acronym means, or I don't know what is dependency, or things like that. Practice 17 is keeping in touch with kin a formal foster family responsibility. And this means that your foster families, whether they are kin foster families or they are non-kin foster families, need to understand that part of their job as a foster parent is keeping the kids in their care connected with their kin. And we included some links to some state foster parent trainings that highlight this responsibility and give tips on how to make this responsibility clear. Many times foster parents don't think that they have to do this, or they may, for various reasons, be reticent to do that. They may not want to help the kids in their care stay in touch with kin, and that's not okay. Unless there's a true safety concern, which you'll handle on an individual case-by-case basis, that foster family needs to help, the phone calls happen, the letters happen, birthday gift exchange happen, and to the extent practical, facilitate transportation, or maybe your agency can help with transportation, or maybe there's services like Hop, Skip, Drive that can help with transportation, so that and sometimes there may even be trips to visit family, and making sure that that's happening is really critical throughout the entirety of a child's case. Practice 18 Now we're getting a little bit more specific with some of these practices, but using a red team to prevent adverse placement. So what's a red team? A red team is a group of decision makers at your agency that can convene quickly to arrive at a decision quickly. And this example, we have a couple of inspirational stories in the toolkit from states that are doing this. This tended to happen, especially during the pandemic, around group home placements. And the idea here was the agency would a kiddo is imminently going to be placed in a group home. Let's get all the decision makers we can together in the agency to make genograms, work on a heart map, make phone calls, do that higher level of rapid effort to keep that kiddo from being placed in a group home. Other adverse placements that could warrant a red team might be an out-of-county placement, might be an out-of-school district placement. It might be a new placement that's going to separate a sibling group. We recognize that agencies don't have the resource to run a red team on every single placement. As ideal as that might be, that's certainly a North Star. But how can you identify your most adverse placements and who could be on a red team that by the end of that red team, that could be even a couple of hours or maybe half an hour a day for a few days in a row, that can do the activities and make the decisions to find kin and get that kin approved, right? This might require case-by-case exceptions. It might require a translator. It might require out-of-state travel. There's various things, and it's really about very, very rapidly solving those problems so that that kiddo doesn't experience adverse placement, or if they do, we get them out of it as soon as possible. And this could be something that you pilot with one kiddo to start and see as you start figuring out who needs to be there, who's missing, what resources might you need, how do you make the time and space to do it, and what criteria you're going to use that will flag a red team. A red team could be ad hoc, which means you kind of call it together as needed, or it could be a regular cadence that addresses the kiddos that meet the adverse placement level. Number 19 is making sure kin have a robust presence at meetings. My favorite example of this is from Olmsted County, Minnesota. It's on Bob Friend's podcast, where they talk through how they redesigned their meeting form to have more lines to write down the names of unpaid adults than they had for paid staff. So this tweak that they did was literally, they took the meeting invite and they added extra lines, blank lines to it. And that dramatically shifted the number of supportive adults that started coming to these meetings. I also remember another story about a older teen in care whose worker explicitly asked him to invite one kin to the meeting, to their next planning meeting. And this kiddo invited their boss at McDonald's. This boss at McDonald's did not know this child was in foster care or needed placement, and immediately took placement and ultimately adopted him. An extreme example, but this is a relatively small shift that you can make in your practices of, adding lines to the meeting invite, or making sure that you ask youth, ask any kin that are coming, ask parents, is there someone that they could invite? Making it sort of not a high pressure ask, but making it seem like the normal course of business is that youth have someone with them and parents have someone with them. This can really surface more kin. And also, even if they're not taking placement, again, they may uncover a number of additional ways that they can support that youth that they didn't know about before, whether that's transportation or tutoring or help with some, the list of examples that we've heard is really endless. Okay, number 20, extreme family finding. So this was a program that gave certain agencies grants to hire a private investigator. And I love this story. While hiring a private investigator may not be in the reach of every agency, I think it's important to at least include and highlight it in the toolkit, who had some pretty incredible success stories, especially for kiddos who were assigned to the private investigator, who the agencies felt like they had exhausted all their possible prior resources. And these private investigators, went to old neighborhoods, talked to all the neighbors, had that time, right, to commit to an extreme level of kin finding that we may not be able to do every day. And their success rate was just absolutely off the walls, despite having the hardest cases. And so the toolkit includes some success stories. There's a great video from Rhode Island, and there's some other material on places that adopted extreme family finding. And hopefully that can be inspirational. Just encourage thinking outside of the box for some other ways that we may be able to find or hire members of the community with skills like private investigation, who can help track down kin in some of the harder, toughest situations. Life books, and a shout out to Maryland, who had these really beautiful life books created, and there's 3 blank PDFs. There are 3 different designs that you can access through the toolkit. And the idea here is, every kiddo in foster care should have a life book, and it includes notes about their family member, depending on how old they are, right? Maybe a lock of hair, or they're a day that they took their first steps, or the day they graduated from 8th grade, wherever they are in terms of age and developmental progress. And this is something that everybody can work on and can trade. We heard in Maryland that they often put it in a kiddo's backpack when they go visit their parents, and their parents, update it, and then it goes back to their foster parents, and their foster parents update it, and it could be a great positive way to communicate about that child's life. But critically, for kin purposes, it really strives to capture their relationships over time. And then if, let's say, a placement change is needed sometime into the case, you have this additional rich place to look back and say, who's been involved, who came to the birthday party, who was involved in this way, who was their teacher, last year in school. All of this rich information, it's another place to look for it. And also it's a way to identify, are there gaps in this child's support that can be filled by kin, even if the gap is not needing placement. Okay, and then one more. And then
Marina, before you move on, you've got a couple of good questions in the chat, including how can nonprofit organizations help with kin finding?
Oh, awesome. Yes. So nonprofit organizations, I think, could immensely help with kin finding in understanding with their local agencies, where are the gaps? I mean, this toolkit might be a place to start, right? Which of these are they doing now? Which of them are they not? And what resources do they need to close those gaps? And depending on, nonprofit is a little bit broad to me because you may have a totally different mission. But if you're working with youth or working with parents, constantly advocating to make sure that you're surfacing all those kin connections and there's a plan in place to keep those connections nurtured, I think is a really key point that many organizations can play. I did mention earlier, like sometimes it can be problematic when 7 different people contact grandma at the same time, but I don't know that that's the main problem that we have right now in child welfare, so much as nobody, like 7 people know about grandma and everybody thought that somebody else contacted her. You might also be in a position to help facilitate maintaining those connections. Identifying that youth needs a ride to their job, or help creating a resume, or needs to learn how to tie a tie, and helping proactively make those connections, and potentially even creating new kin for that youth. Some kids don't have very many or any connections, and that doesn't mean that they can't develop those while in care with adults that really care about them and want to support them.
Such a good point. I have a friend who's a CASA volunteer who is stepping out of that role to adopt.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's incredible. So Gloria says extreme family finding might include attending a kin's funeral. Absolutely, that can be part of it. And something mentioned in the toolkit is obituaries, which you can find online, can also be a source of information about a child's potential kin. Talking to funeral home directors, especially in small communities, can be a really rich source of family and kin relationships. So some of this requires some creative communicating. And then Alexander shares Pennsylvania's recipes for success. So we should make sure we get that linked in. Lots of examples of activities to run sessions with the youth. That's awesome.
I'll make sure and get that. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. One last one to bring up. I recognize this is going to be controversial, but I still wanted to include it, is using DNA to find more family connections. There is at least one state doing this right now. And when they do it, it's with older youth who can fully opt in and have a discussion. It's for older youth that don't have current kin connections. And they really try to make sure that youth has support because we never know what's going to come back when you get a 23andMe or an Ancestry. You may discover you have siblings. You may discover your parents are perhaps not who you thought your parents were. It can be a very overwhelming amount of information. And so this should be used with extreme caution and lots of support and lots of foresight. But I included it because for some youth, this may make a lot of sense as the tool that can help uncover connections that can give that child a sense of permanency and family when they don't otherwise have it. And so in the toolkit, it includes, some guidelines if you're thinking about adopting this practice. And we would definitely welcome any additional guidelines if other agencies are using this practice to help make sure that it's available when needed, but it is used really thoughtfully and with lots of support for the kids. Okay, that was my 22 promising practices. And so what's next? So Anna shared the link to the toolkit. Would love folks to read it, look through it from two angles. One is you may have new or updated examples to share with other agencies, and we really welcome those. I believe a theory of change in child welfare is it's much easier and better for everyone to take something that another agency has already started doing and adapt what they've been doing rather than everybody starting from scratch. And so would really, really welcome examples. A flip side of that is there a space where you think you need more examples or you need more collateral or support? And speaking of that ask, in 2024, we're going to run a series of learning collaboratives or communities of practice, whatever your preferred term is, around a subset of these practices. And the goal is, let's say it's using social media. We will bring together some agencies that are currently very experienced at using social media. We'll bring in agencies that really want to use social media and feel blocked. And we'll try to pair them up and work through barriers so that the agencies that aren't using social media but want to have the support and resources that you need to implement it. And then where needed, we may be able to pull in certain outside experts for different practices. In particular, the one around testing communications with kin. Like, let's bring in a plain language content expert who can help draft and refine some templates and that we can then test. We can't run 22 communities of practice. So we really, really want your feedback on which ones you would like the most help with. And it's our assumption that some of these you may be already doing, right? Some of them you may say, oh, I know how to do this. I want to do this. I know how to do this. I've got it. And other ones you may say, I would really like some help, whatever that help may be. And so we are sharing a poll where it's a quick poll, but if you can run through it and say which of the practices we talked through you would be interested in receiving implementation support for, we will kind of tally everybody's results. And in 2024, let you know more about which ones were picked and what the process will be. Our intention is that they're really efficiently run groups. So you shouldn't expect, 40 hours a week of work or anything, but it'll be enough support to get you to your goal. So whatever that may be, and I think that will probably change based on what the particular practice is. It's our goal for every agency to adopt at least one new kin-finding practice from this toolkit, whether you do it on your own or you do it through the community of practice. Doesn't matter to me. So really, really hope that this toolkit provides actionable material and inspiration to pick up one new practice. And I am really excited to think about how many more kids will be with kin if across the country, every state adopts one new kin-finding practice. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer more questions. I know we are a bit early on us, so I talk really fast. That's probably on me. You're muted.
Sorry about that. My microphone likes to switch on me. People always value time is what I was saying, but we want to open up this time for any questions that people have for Marina, and to please answer that poll that we dropped in the chat. Feel free to just type it in the chat and we will ask. And do know that a lot of the links and a lot of the resources that Marina talked about are in the toolkit, which we dropped in the chat too.
Yep. And you may want to read the toolkit and then fill out the survey, in a few days. So I don't know if we want to give like a time frame on the poll.
Yeah, and we're also going to share it in the follow-up email. So you will get it again. So yeah, you could answer it in the next few days, and we'll put a deadline in there.
Perfect.
All right, folks. Well, do know that we have the assistance form that we've shared, and I'll have Kylie drop it in the chat again. But so if you think of questions for Marina after the fact, or questions for us, or you want us to look to see, does Texas have a family firewall policy? We will research it for you. So feel free to reach out. We're also going to ask you if you would complete just a brief survey about this webinar itself. It's very brief. And we'll drop that in the chat as well. We'll also share in that follow-up email. But we really thank you all so much for being here with us today. And we thank you, Marina, for pulling together this amazing toolkit with your partners in all these states and coming up with a really actionable, practical piece. Very exciting.
All credit to all the agencies. I just compiled them into a document. So they're doing the hard work of supporting our kids and families.
Yes, they are, but you are too. So all right, well, we'll just leave the chat, open for a second here so y'all can capture what you need, and we do really appreciate you joining us. And I see a lot of great comments for you, Marina, so don't miss those. Right, thank you. Well, I think you can shut us off now.